So dealing with objections, it's probably the core of the sales process that many get stuck on or feel a little bit overwhelmed when facing an objection. The reality is we need objections. So I'm going to break it down to three things. First of all, what is an objection? The second one is how do you deal with the objection? And the third one is a sales toolkit. So basically preparing you in advance for these types of objections and how to handle them moving forward. So what is an objection? Well, first of all, it doesn't matter how long you've been in sales or if you're a high-performing salesperson, often an objection will catch you off guard and actually it will actually take you back a little bit because you may not have been expecting that specific type of objection. However, what an objection is, it's simply a request for further information. And if you frame it like that in your own mind, it makes a lot more sense. So it's not so kind of confronting when a customer throws an objection at you, because the reality is the objection may be something they misunderstand. It could be they just don't see the value that you're offering and it's not aligning strong enough with what their needs are. It could be a bit of misinformation or something that you may have just glossed over briefly when you were talking about your product and your services. So the key thing is, first of all, take a step back and breathe and just remember an objection is simply a request for more information and get comfortable with that. We need objections in the sales process because it shows engagement from the customer. And what the customer is telling you is, hey, I've got some other concerns, and they're bringing it up out of the iceberg. I always talk about the iceberg, which is the underlying objections. And if you're not getting to that, often you find it very hard to get a commitment from the customer because they're not buying into what you're sharing with them, or they just don't see the value in it. So you need objections. So when a customer raises an objection, look at it in a positive light. The communication, the engagement levels are increasing, and they're really telling you what they think and go through that process. So objections, we need them. Often I find when coaching salespeople and I say, well, how would you handle this objection? And they quickly counteract what the customers raised, which is probably not the wisest thing to do because it is kind of confronting backwards and forwards like that. What you want to do is just validate it. So just ask to come back with a question and to put context to it. It could be, well, I think that's expensive. Oh, and the response would be, oh, why do you say that? Because what they may be communicating out to you is expensive, but what is expensive? Like, what are they comparing it to? These types of things are really important before you counteract and go, well, no, it's not expensive. And then start shooting off all the kind of features and benefits of what you're about to offer. So just step back a bit, ask the customer, when you say that, what do you mean by that? Or what makes you say that? Things like that. And it takes the pressure off you when you're selling and talking to the customer and really getting to understand what they mean by it. The other one is really important. When you cover that objection, ask if there's any others. Is there anything else you don't like about what I've shared with you? And the reason for that is you don't want to go through a process and then all of a sudden have to backpedal because you've missed, there's another concern behind it. So just ask them, okay, so in this example, it could be price. So you're concerned about the price. Is there anything else you don't like about the product? No? Okay, so with the price, what do you say it's expensive? Yep, so you get that information out from the customer so you understand clearly, and then repeat it back to the customer. It shows that you're listening to what their objection is. There's nothing worse than a salesperson that chooses just to keep on moving through the process and ignore the customer's concerns. So summarize back to the customer, this is what I understand your concerns are. If I could overcome those, we'd just be interested to move forward. Well, yep, that's fine. So then that's the time you can address the objection. And the reality is you probably will have the answer for it and the right response. But again, frame it in that mind. It's simply a request for more information. So we're talking a little bit about how you handle it and going to stage 2. Kind of covered a little bit of it, but the first thing is breathe. You're not in a rush. Take your time. It could be something that you've heard time and time before and you just want to jump in and answer. The temptation to do that, try and avoid it because there might be another underlying objection. So pause, take your time. That's interesting. It's often used because it's not an agreement or a disagreement. Just say, well, that's interesting. What makes you say that? Draw out what you need from the customer. Ask them if there's any more objections. Write them down. Shows that you're listening. Don't feel rushed. Then respond in the appropriate way to kind of overcome that objection, which would be realigning what their needs are to the product or services you're offering. And if you're done of all the questioning of the client's needs at the beginning of the process well, it is easier to deal with these objections. So I find, particularly when I'm coaching within the financial sector, often that's the gap. For example, I might be coaching with a finance broker. He gets an application approved and the rate is delivered back to the customer. The customer's not happy with the rate, thinks it's expensive. Now, if the broker has done the questioning part right at the beginning of the application, it makes that conversation a lot easier because you can explain to the customer why that rate is applicable to that customer. And they might not be obtaining a tier 1 finance rate. So questioning is the critical part because it will help you overcome objections. So slow it down at the beginning and then work through the process. Once you've come back to the customer with your answer on the objection, ask them if there's anything else again, just to reaffirm if that's satisfactory. That may not be enough. You may need to give them a bit more to again validate what you're saying and also prove that value to the customer and that they need your products or services. Once you go from that point and the customer goes, yep, yes, that's fine, I understand, or that makes sense to me, then you work through the process. If the customer then turns around and says, no, I'm not happy with that, go back again and go ask why again and just try and dig under the iceberg a little bit more and find out what the bottleneck is. So that's a little bit about objections. The third and the final step I was going to share with you is building a toolbox or your sales playbook. What you find in organisations is the objections you get are often the same objections. So writing an answer and then storing that into your toolbox, which could be a virtual toolbox as such on your computer. So when a customer raises a question, an objection about this, you've got a go-to answer on it and be able to articulate it very well. If you're new to a business and a new role, you may not have those answers, and that's why a playbook in the organisation is very good, because that's normally built from the experienced sales team that have had a lot of experience in handling objections. If you haven't got that, maybe refer to someone that's been more experienced in the industry and ask them how they're dealing with that objection. But I do recommend building a sales playbook or a sales toolkit around objections and the most common responses that you get that you find the customers accept more often. The reality is you're going to get objections that you may not have had before, and that's fine. Again, don't feel threatened by it. Be comfortable with it. You know your products and your services probably better than the customer does, so you can kind of validate that value back to them. Hope this was helpful. If you'd like more information on handling objections or upskilling your team, reach out to me. I'd be happy to help.